Hi there, it's Catherine, your lawyer friend and guide, and this is the #1 podcast for legal careers in Japan.
Hi there, this is Jane Nakata. I'm the producer and editor of the Lawyer on Air podcast. It's great to have you here again for the final episode of Season 9. If you've been with us since we started the podcast, you'll have heard how it's evolved over the last 9 seasons. Today, you're going to hear about the impact of the podcast. Catherine has lots of stories to tell us about how the podcast has helped so many people, not only here in Japan, but across the world. I know the podcast has changed Catherine's life. It's certainly changed mine. And today we'll hear how it's changed the lives of our listeners and guests. Today you're going to hear what it was like for Catherine to start this podcast back in Season 1. And what I hope that anyone listening today to this episode will take away is that today's smoothness and professionalism is a culmination of 100 episodes of practice at being a podcast host. So please do go back and check that first episode and know that it's okay to not be so good at something when you start, because you can improve bit by bit. The wonderful thing about podcasts is there's evidence to show how much you've improved. It's really satisfying when you notice that. And it's my hope that the Lawyer on Air podcast will become a symbol of what's possible for women in Japan working in the law. Also, make sure you listen to the end of the episode to hear the special surprise that Catherine has prepared for you. I'm sure you're going to love it. And thank you to you, Catherine, for never giving up on this podcast, even when it was tricky at the start and uncomfortable, and you felt a little bit self-conscious. You didn't let that stop you. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to create in Season 10. Let's get into it.
4 years ago, I hit record on Lawyer on Air for the very first time. I was excited, nervous, and honestly, I had no idea what was about to unfold. And now, approaching nearly 100 guests later, I can say this podcast has changed lives. Not just for my guests, not just for my listeners, but for me too. What started as a way to share insights with lawyers in Japan has become so much more. A community, a movement, a space where voices that have never been heard could finally be amplified. I remember pressing record for the first time back in March 2021. I felt a mix of excitement and total nerve-wracking fear. If you want proof, especially if you're a lawyer, go back to episode 1 in Season 1 and you'll hear exactly what I mean. And to my very first guest, Angela Krantz, thank you so much for trusting me to kick off this journey. Now with Season 10 just around the corner, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on this journey so far, the lessons that I've learned and the incredible stories that have shaped this show. And for some words from the guests and listeners who've also been a big part of it all. So thanks for tuning in and let's dive in. For the past 4 years, I've been sharing the untold stories of women lawyers in Japan through this podcast. For inclusivity, I've invited male allies to speak as well. I prep and record each guest on Zoom, but the seamless production and management of the podcast, well, that's not me. That's thanks to my co-creation with Pod Launch with Jane Nakata. Thank you, Jane. If you talk to Jane, she will tell you this podcast was long in the making, from when I first whispered to her back in October 2018 that I wanted to do a podcast, but I had no idea how to. So I hesitated for 2 years. I was held back by the fear of tech and the unknown. What if it failed? How embarrassing. Well, finding the right support in Jane, someone who could handle the tech, manage the production, and create a safe place for guests, and also empower me to be brave and go for it. All of those things were so key to making this happen. And wow, did it happen. Podcasting transcends boundaries. It's a remarkable medium, and it's allowed me to amplify the unheard voices of women in Japan and reach listeners I might never have ever crossed paths with otherwise. Take John Lindsay, for example, a 10 global legal tech content creator in the US. John told me recently, I've taken you all over Texas with me, and now that I'm on the East Coast, you've been from Florida to New York. But wait, isn't this a podcast for women and for lawyers and for people in Japan, right? Well, yes and no. The impact of these recorded stories has rippled far beyond my recording studio in Tokyo. The waves have reached the shores of 50 or 60 countries. They've reached men, non-lawyers, and people just looking for connection and insight. And my latest avid listener, who's that? Well, it's Dr. Ariel Thorpe, and she's the incredible owner of Electra Chiropractic in Tokyo. A doctor who supports people managing their pain. That person is a fan of Lawyer on Air. Who would have thought? So Ariel shared this with me. Lawyer on Air is full of tangible career advice, even for a non-lawyer like myself, and gives clear explanations of Japanese laws. Catherine and her guests share helpful information that's otherwise not easily found in English and provides real context for life in Japan. Ariel first clicked on Season 8, Episode 10 with Yumi Itakura, and from there she was hooked. She said, I really listen to podcasts, but this one makes me stop and rewind to catch all the details. Wow, thank you, Ariel. You have made my day. Another guest, the brilliant Akiko Kawaguchi, was featured in the first episode of Season 8. Her 23-year-old son is an engineer, and he listened to her career story on the podcast. Afterwards, he told his mum that he had learned so much about her and what lawyers do. And get this, that episode spurred him to start listening to other podcasts, and now he's a podcast junkie. 23 years old, engineer, male. So perhaps you can see what I mean when I say this podcast has seeped its way into the most unexpected corners of people's lives in ways I never imagined. For me, podcasting has evolved from a dream into a passion. It's become my walking, talking resume, opening doors to opportunities I never expected. As I recorded more podcasts, I built my online presence and my personal brand. Now, people recognize me not just by my face, but by the sound of my voice you can hear right now. And the impact, well, bigger than I ever dreamed. People have written to tell me they landed new roles, started studying law, took the leap to work in Japan, and actively started prepping for a dream role on a Japanese company board. All because of something they heard someone wise say on Lawyer on Air. Through podcasting, I've had the privilege of uplifting others, sparking conversations, and fostering genuine connections around the world. It's led to incredible moments like being invited to serve as Master of Ceremonies for major events, speaking in front of an incredibly big arena of 2,800 people, and being a keynote speaker. It turns out this podcast was an ongoing audition for opportunities I never saw coming. Who knew? But by far, the most profound feedback I've ever received is from those who found solace, healing, and belonging through this podcast. One guest shared a story with me that stopped me in my tracks. She had been estranged from her mother for years, never heard the words of praise, and always felt unseen. But somehow her mother found and listened to her episode. And though she never told her daughter directly, she told her friends, I'm so proud of my daughter. Her mother passed away, but those friends later shared what her mother had said. Hearing those stories from her mother's friends gave my guest a final message of love that she never expected. That story gives me chills every time. And then there's Akio Inoko Hewitt, Lawyer on Air's top fan. She told me this. The Lawyer on Air podcast saved me from loneliness. When I first started listening to the podcast, I worked at a law firm in a mid-sized city abroad, believing that a law firm role was the only option if I wanted to stay in the area. I often wished that I had been in Tokyo for a far better selection of career opportunities. I didn't have a good role model and similar backgrounds where I lived. Listening to the podcast during my commute introduced me to various role models and career paths I had never knew existed. It made me feel inspired, encouraged, and empowered. I no longer felt lonely or hopeless. When I transitioned to an in-house counsel role a couple of years later, I felt confident, thanks to the stories shared by many in-house lawyers on the Lawyer on Air podcast. That this podcast could cure someone's loneliness and lead them to a new law career, well, that makes tears fall out of my eyes. So as season 10 begins, here's what I want to leave with you. To my amazing guests, thank you so much. None of this would have happened without you. So many of you told me, "Oh, I'm nothing special. My career is boring. I have nothing to say." And yet after recording, I saw your words transformed into, "I've had a career I'm really proud of." Or, "I actually enjoyed talking about my career and I hope it inspires someone else." Or, "I realized my career is great and talking about it openly made me believe it." To my listeners, my community, and my people, here's my call to action for you. First, if you've been hesitating to step up, to speak up and share your story, take this as your sign from me. Just do it. Second, yes, go ahead and follow all of your passions, but also don't forget to go deeper. Follow your contribution. Think about it. What is it that you can give back to this world? And third, if you think you're just one person who can't make an impact, believe me, you can. 100% you can. Just take action. Start small and see where it goes. So cheers to everyone who has joined me at the virtual bar, who poured a drink with me and shared their stories. Together, you've helped make this podcast the #1 podcast for legal careers in Japan. I treasure you all, and I can't wait to see what season 10 and the next chapter will bring. So it's time to say it. Cheers, kampai, and bye for now. But wait, don't hit stop just yet. I have a surprise for you. If you know me well, you know I love music. It's my backbone for stress relief, for energy, for inspiration. So to celebrate this journey, I've created something special. Unpausable, the ultimate reinvention playlist on Spotify. This is for those of you who refuse to be put on pause, for those of you who are stepping up, speaking out, dancing, thriving, and owning the room, wherever that may be. Check the show notes for the full track list and why I picked each song just for you. Now it really is time to say it. Cheers, kampai, and bye for now.